Hi guys, this is Max here back again with a brand new video, and today we are going to talk about the US House of Representatives and the US Senate's latest actions in regards to gun control. Now, first of all, before we take a look at the further specifics of this act of gun legislation, it is important to get an overall frame of what exactly went down. Now, the US House of Representatives passed this law that says a bunch of bad stuff in a vote that had 5 Republicans vote in favor of it and 2 Democrats voting against it. And those 2 Democrats were Kurt Schroeder, who already lost his primary, and Jared Golden, the epic and based representative from Maine's 2nd District, who, in contrast to the more liberal Republican who held that seat before him and is trying to run again against him, has actually been fairly conservative and principled. And so I now want to officially announce today that I am endorsing Jared Golden in 2022 for re-election. I do not want this liberal Republican juggernaut, dumbass or whatever, to come back in and then vote for additional gun control legislation because he wants to have, I don't know, quote unquote common sense gun laws. Well, on the other hand, Jared Golden is a principled and based conservative on social and personal issues. He might be a bit more liberal in economic issues, but that's fine. I'd rather have somebody in there who supports more welfare programs than somebody who's trying to take away your Second Amendment rights. So therefore, Jared Golden, you're based. Thank you for voting against this. Now, let's go ahead and take a little look at what this bill exactly says and why I'm so greatly opposed to it. Now, first of all, raise the age. Now, I've never really understood that about America. Why does every single fucking nation in the West have the drinking age at 18 years and America just randomly puts it at 21? Says, when you're 21 years old, you all of a sudden have the maturity to get bench drunk, and before that, you gotta be abstinent. Now, first of all, it doesn't work shit. I went to high school, and people who are 16, 17, even 15 years old get bench drunk and blow their fucking minds with liquor, and nobody's preventing that. In fact, having the drinking age at 21 leads to people getting fake IDs and getting arrested with those for bullshit ass reasons just because they can't get into a bar after they are already adults. That just doesn't make sense. However, that's not the main point of this discussion. Title 1 prohibits people that are 19, 18, 20 years old from owning a semi-automatic rifle or shotgun. These people, literally, are legal adults. They don't live at home in many cases. They have the right to vote. They can get fucking drafted to die in the Middle East with a machine gun in their hand, but they can't have a semi-automatic rifle at home. That is just the worst bullshit I've ever seen. They can be sent to fight in wars, but they're not allowed to have guns at home. That just doesn't make any fucking sense. Now, semi-automatic guns, that's basically an AR-15, that's a shotgun. That is most long rifle guns. And since 18 to 20-year-olds are already not allowed to have handguns, it basically makes it impossible for them to own guns at all. And this provision might actually be unconstitutional because it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. And when you're an adult, when you start voting, I have no doubt that you're considered part of the people and that you are not allowed to own a gun. Imagine they would have expanded this provision for all Americans, not just younger ones. It would never sustain the Supreme Court. It would never be constitutional, and yet they did it for this certain age group. That needs to be struck down. Now, next one is prevent gun trafficking. I read myself through this article, and I believe gun trafficking has something to do with parents handing over their guns to younger children, but it might also... Yeah, it makes it impossible for you to transfer a gun to a third party. It also... It has a lot of hefty restrictions on on what are you allowed to use a gun for when you buy it. So basically only for personal usage, not for usage in a business, not for giving it to someone else, not even for giving it to your own children. It is basically bullshit. And then they have like this provision that says untraceable firearms. Like, you're not allowed to have firearms that are not trackable, whatever that means, and modernization of the prohibition of untraceable firearms. So if you have an untraceable firearm, you're not allowed to modernize it or do something to it. Overall, what this title does, it makes it more difficult for you to do stuff with your gun, like experiment with it. And then there's safe storage, and this is actually the only provision that I can't understand, because safe storage requires it to be stored so kids can't get to it, which definitely makes sense. And yeah, you're basically not, your gun is not supposed to be accessible to people whom you don't want it to access. So it's basically forcing you to be more careful with your gun, which honestly, that's a very good point. Only a careful and well-minded gun owner is also a legitimate gun owner. Only a person that knows how to properly handle their weapon in a way that's both safe for them and their environment should be able to have a gun. And I believe that the vast majority of people are capable of doing so, so therefore the safe storage provision, there's nothing against that, really. Now, bump stocks, that is kind of a difficult one. I mean, I can understand why people say bump stock, you shouldn't have that, because you shouldn't have a machine gun, and bump stocks is just a way to get around that, because you wouldn't pull the trigger, it's the trigger moving around your finger that makes it fire multiple shots. Yet, on the other hand, I do think that there shouldn't be an outright ban on machine guns, because we had machine guns for decades, and it wasn't until the 1980s that they were banned, and during that time we had less mass shootings than we have today. So I definitely think that this law should be repealed. It says the right to keep and bear arms should not be infringed based on the basis of being able to form a militia that can challenge an oppressive state. And in order to form such a militia, it requires the usage of fully automatic weapons. So therefore, I am against the idea that you shouldn't be able to own a machine gun. Yet on the other hand, bump stocks would turn an illegal weapon into an illegal weapon, and therefore there is a pretty good case to be made that this law should also be implemented. Now, keeping firearms safe, that's just basically justifying why they passed all these other titles. Doesn't really have and also penalties that you'll receive if you break those laws. It doesn't really add anything to it. But overall, this is not a good bill. It is unreasonable. It makes it basically impossible or very hard for anybody who's 18, 19, or 20 years old to have a firearm. And something that I didn't even mention yet is it incentivizes states to pass red flag laws. Red flag laws mean that if you were in a relationship with somebody, or if you were married to somebody, and they said you abused them, then you're not allowed to own a firearm in case if you're found guilty by some random court. Or, yeah, I mean, red flag laws in theory are a good idea because they would prevent mentally insane people from possessing a firearm. However, they can be overstretched, and in the end, these restrictions are applied to people who are perfectly capable of possessing a firearm, and the only reason why they're not supposed to have them is because somebody said that they were making them feel uncomfortable or some bullshit. And then we, of course, have prevent gun trafficking. Well, I already explained that. It's mostly like people not being allowed to transfer them to other people, including their own children or other organizations. Basically, most of these laws are either unconstitutional, like in the first case, very unreasonable, like in the second, and in some cases they actually do make sense. So it's actually a mixed bag bill. However, Title 1 and Title 2 in my eyes are just complete deal breakers because they wholly and full-heartedly break with the gun rights precedent that we had for decades. And there is a bunch of Republicans who backstabbed their constituents and voted in favor of this bill. For a moment, I thought John Tester was going to vote against it because he's a Westerner. He generally has an idea of why people want their guns. But hey, all these Republicans voted in favor of it anyway, so why should he vote against it? It makes me just so mad. Now, Bill Cassidy in Louisiana has no excuse to vote for it. Louisiana is a red state. Louisiana has lots of gun owners, and he also voted to impeach Donald Trump, which would be the less controversial of his two votes because these are really, really hefty Second Amendment restrictions. Now, Mitch McConnell I always thought was an asshole, corrupted goon with a neoliberal agenda, just like most Republicans do. Republicans have always in the past been very, very supportive towards big business, much so than I would personally be. And Mitch McConnell is the embodiment of that. If we'd be able to get rid of him, I believe Congress's approval rating would go up by a lot, and the Republican Party wouldn't be a lot more, but at least a little more focused on helping out the little guy. Shelley Moore Capito definitely needs to be primaried because she's in West Virginia. It's a very rural state, has a lot of gun owners, and she's also pro-choice, just for the record. So I got no clue why she's in the Senate. Now, the two North Carolina senators, Tom Tillis and Richard Burr, both voted against it. Now, North Carolina is more of a purple state by now, and even though it really is not, I do think most people perceive this as a moderate bill, so I would get why he voted in favor of it. Now, the Georgia senators are Democrats. Raphael Warnock is going to lose, not even going to talk about that. Now, Ohio, Rob Portman is retiring. That doesn't matter anymore. A shout out to Ron Johnson. Even though he's like from a very swing state, purple state, Wisconsin, he's always had a fairly consistent, strong conservative voting record. He did not vote to overturn the election. He did not take it too far, but he has always maintained strong conservative credentials. And again, he has shown us that even though people from states like Kentucky, Missouri, and even Utah would vote for this piece of crap legislation, he stood his ground and didn't support it. One interesting thing, by the way, Pat Toomey, who had a history of supporting gun reform laws, who even supported the Manchin-Toomey resolution, was the main co-sponsor of it along with Joe Manchin, which would have expanded background checks and was far less radical than this bill. And yet he voted against gun reform. And he's retiring. So we have a liberal Republican who supported gun reform in the past voting against this garbage gun control bill, which I personally find pretty fascinating. So a shout out to Pat Toomey that he was able to see through that. Then we have Todd Young from Indiana vote in favor of it. Roy Blunt vote in favor of it if he's retiring. Mitch McConnell is probably retiring, and even if he's not, I believe by this point he has endangered enough people to actually not win renomination for a 7th term. So Mitt Romney from Utah, I really don't know about that. I mean, Mitt Romney has been conservative senator so far. He has been anti-Trump, but that's not a big issue in Utah. Utah is a pretty non-Trump friendly state, and it'll be interesting to see how Evan McMullin will do because he's also Mormon and he might have an outreach to the conservative anti-Trump base. I do think that Mitt Romney would maybe win re-election. I don't think this gun bill will stick around for too long. It might. It really should because it's an infringement upon Second Amendment rights, but it probably isn't. And also, Utah runs a system where they have a convention on both sides, and they pick 2 candidates that go off in the actual primary election amongst all registered Republicans and all registered Democrats in order to pick the nominee for each party. So Utah has a weird primary system where you first have a convention and then you have a primary between the favorite 2 candidates, so I don't think Mitt Romney is going to lose. So forget about that. And Joni Ernst, I'm really disappointed by Joni Ernst because I thought she'd be a great conservative senator, but she ended up being quite liberal. I mean, not really liberal, but she did kind of backstab the base in this case, especially considering that Chuck Grassley, who has been in there a lot longer and has a much more bipartisan, much more moderate record than her, voted against that, so I really can't understand her in that regard. And yeah, I mean, I don't think she's likely to lose a primary because she's fairly popular with Republicans. But to sum this up, there's one person, actually 2 people we haven't talked about yet. And these 2 people really make me mad. I mean, no joke. I am fucking furious. John Cornyn and Lisa Murkowski. Now, first of all, John Cornyn from Texas, it is a red state. Texas has gotten more purple, but it is still a red state. It is Republican, and it has a very large rural population that just loves their guns. Guns are as Texan as chattel and beef. And he voted in favor of what would strip probably over 1 million Texans between the ages of 18 and 20 from their constitutional rights to purchase firearms. Ted Cruz got mad at him, but that doesn't matter as much as that the Republican state legislature is probably gonna bound together in order to censure John Cornyn. He was the one who manufactured this bipartisan deal. He was the one behind it. He is literally the guy responsible for this bill. And there should be zero tolerance for that. Never. He is backstabbing the state of Texas and its independent spirit to have every state choose what they want to do in regards to gun control. And he today voted for a federal gun control law which would outlaw it throughout the land for people between the ages of 18 and 21 to own guns. And he wants to incentivize and pressure states into implementing red flag laws, which should be red flags all across the board. Now, last but not least, Lisa Murkowski. I think it's not even up for debate on why she's a terrible senator. She got in there because her nepotistic dad, who was the worst governor in Alaska history and only cared about his fucking self, appointed her to that seat. She has never been a conservative senator. She voted present on the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, voted against advancing the vote on Amy Coney Barrett, and she has the worst record in human history when it comes to a Republican. She is to the left of Lisa Murkowski despite being in Alaska. I pray to God that she's going to lose re-election because she is the worst ever. She needs to go, and she has no more place in a modern society. Now, I've gone off pretty badly on Cornyn and Murkowski. I mean, Murkowski needs to be primaried out. She's the worst rhino ever. No place for her. John Cornyn, also terrible man. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. He's a fucking idiot. He has backstabbed the people of Texas. But last but not least, one good example. I think Susan Collins in Maine is the only senator that has a good reason to say that she should vote in favor of that, because she is a liberal Republican from the Northeast. In order to win re-election, she does have to vote for certain legislation to maintain her credibility with a moderate base. I can also understand not Richard Burr because he's retiring. He could have voted against it, but maybe Tom Tillis because North Carolina is getting kind of closer. But other than that, none of the Republican senators who voted in favor of this bill would have had to or would have lost or endangered their re-election by voting against it. And they are awful traitors, especially establishment hacks like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, because this bill is not going to help Republicans. It is going to de-energize the Republican base, which is heavily in favor of gun rights. And it will furthermore also greatly disincentivize libertarians from turning out to vote, because libertarians are not automatic supporters of the Republican Party. Libertarians want to see their gun rights protected, and that's what drives them to the Republicans. Democrats are not going to vote more Republican because of 14 Republicans voting for some gun control act. Democrats are always going to vote for them that are going to give them even more. There is literally no political gain to the Republicans for passing this bill. There would have been a gain in firmly opposing it because it would have incentivized and motivated the Republican base to turn out. There would have been far less hate by the Democrats against the Republicans to turn out, rather than there would have been hate against the Biden administration for not doing anything to combat school shootings. So it would have been electorally smarter for Republicans to not do anything, because it would have exposed and shown the Biden administration as a do-nothing administration in regards to every single issue. And even though I wouldn't want him to accomplish anything in regard to gun control, I do think that it would be great for him if this bill actually gets signed, because that is good publicity and it will help him in the midterm elections. So I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to say. I hope that I've been able to make my point clear. But I'm trying to say, the 3 points of this video are, this bill is very bad because it infringes upon young people's right to own a gun, because it makes it easier for people that have certain enemies who accuse them of inappropriate behavior to lose their right to keep and bear arms, so red flag laws. And because this bill has been supported by so many Republican senators who wouldn't have had to. And the last and final point of this video is that the Republicans are not going to gain a single inch from passing this. It's Joe Biden who's going to gain, because gun control would be the first major thing since the $2,000 stimulus checks that has happened under his administration, and will help him galvanize turnout for Democrats in the 2022 midterms. And that's everything I'm trying to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did so, please leave a thumbs up. Be sure to check out my other content as well. Have a good time, and see you later. Goodbye.